The night shift at Windsor Castle was always the quietest. Thomas had walked these stone corridors for 12 years, his boots echoing against walls that had witnessed centuries of secrets. But tonight, something felt different. It was just past midnight when he noticed the light. A faint glow coming from the East Wing office, a room that should have been locked and empty. Thomas stopped. His hand moved instinctively to the radio on his belt, but something made him pause. He had been told to ignore certain things. Every guard knew there were rooms you didn't enter, conversations you didn't hear, faces you pretended not to recognize. That was the job. Discretion wasn't just expected, it was survival. But Thomas was different. He believed in duty. Real duty. Not the kind that looked the other way. He moved closer to the door. Voices drifted through the gap, low and urgent. One voice he recognized immediately. It belonged to someone who shouldn't have been in the palace at this hour. Someone whose very presence here was a carefully guarded secret. Thomas had seen him before. Always arriving through the side entrance, always late at night, always escorted by private security rather than palace staff. The man was in his 40s, well-dressed, confident, and he looked remarkably like someone the public had never been told existed. If you're loving this story so far, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what happens next. The voices grew louder. Thomas heard papers rustling. Then he heard a name that made his blood run cold. Camilla signed off on everything, the man said. The properties are all under shell companies. No one will trace them back to us. Thomas pressed himself against the wall. His heart pounded. Shell companies. Hidden properties. And the Queen Consort's name attached to it all.
How many
are we talking about? Another voice asked. 17 so far? London, Manchester, Edinburgh. Luxury apartments, commercial buildings, worth at least £80 million. Maybe more. £80 million. Thomas felt dizzy. He had spent his entire career protecting the institution, believing in its honor. And now, standing in this dark hallway, he was hearing about a fortune hidden in shadows. And if anyone finds out, the second voice pressed. There was a pause. Then the first man spoke again, colder this time. They won't. We've made sure of that. Thomas backed away slowly. He needed to think. He needed proof. Because without it, his word meant nothing against theirs. He was just a guard. They were royalty, or close enough to it. But as he retreated down the corridor, he made a decision. He would find the truth, even if it cost him everything. What Thomas didn't know was that someone had already seen him listening at the door. And that person was already making a phone call that would change his life forever. The next morning, Thomas arrived at work with dark circles under his eyes. He hadn't slept. His mind kept replaying the conversation, the numbers, the implications. £80 million in hidden properties. And the Queen Consort knew about it. He went through the motions of his shift mechanically, checking doors, monitoring cameras, nodding at tourists who smiled and took photos. But inside, he was somewhere else entirely. By noon, he had made a plan. He would access the visitor logs, security footage, anything that could prove who that man was and why he kept coming to the palace in secret. Thomas had clearance to most systems. Not everything, but enough. He waited until the shift change, when the security office was briefly unmanned. His fingers moved quickly across the keyboard, pulling up footage from the side entrance. He scrolled back through the weeks. There he was, the same man, arriving always between 11 p.m. and 1 a.m. Sometimes twice a week. Thomas zoomed in on the clearest frame. The man's face filled the screen. The resemblance was undeniable. The same eyes, the same jawline, even the way he carried himself. This wasn't coincidence. He was about to download the footage when a hand landed on his shoulder. Thomas spun around. His supervisor, Martin, stood behind him. The older man's face was unreadable. "Looking for something?" Martin asked quietly. Thomas's mouth went dry. "Just reviewing last night's footage. Standard check." Martin glanced at the frozen image on screen. For a moment, Neither man spoke. Then Martin reached over and closed the window. "Go home, Thomas. You look tired." "I'm fine. Go home." Martin's voice was firmer now. "Take tomorrow off too. You've earned it," wasn't a suggestion. Thomas logged out slowly, his mind racing. Did Martin know? Had someone told him? As Thomas left the palace grounds, he felt eyes on him. He looked back once. Martin was standing at a window, watching him leave that night. Thomas couldn't shake the feeling that he was being followed. Every car that passed seemed to slow down. Every person on the street seemed to look at him too long. He told himself he was paranoid, but paranoia, he knew, was sometimes just pattern recognition. He went to the one person he thought he could trust. His old friend, David, a journalist who had covered royal stories for 20 years but had never compromised his integrity. They met at a quiet pub in Southwark, far from anywhere they might be recognized. Thomas told him everything. The late-night visitor, the conversation about properties, the shell companies, the £80 million. David listened without interrupting. When Thomas finished, the journalist sat back and exhaled slowly. "Do you have proof?" David asked. "I saw the footage. I heard the conversation. But do you have the footage? Documents? Names?" Thomas shook his head. "Not yet, but I can get them." David looked at him seriously. "Thomas, do you understand what you're getting into? If this is real, and I'm not saying it isn't, these aren't people who let stories like this go public. They have resources. Lawyers, connections, they can bury you. So you're saying I should do nothing? I'm saying be careful, be smart, and don't do anything until you have evidence that can't be denied." Thomas nodded. He understood, but he also knew he couldn't walk away. Not now. What neither of them noticed was the man sitting 3 tables away, speaking quietly into his phone while watching them both. 3 days later, Thomas returned to work. He expected tension, questions, maybe even a confrontation. Instead, everything seemed normal. Too normal, Martin greeted him with a nod. The other guards joked about football. No one mentioned the security footage or his sudden days off. It was as if nothing had happened, but Thomas knew better. He had learned to read silence, and this silence was deliberate. He decided to change tactics. Instead of accessing the main security systems, he would go old-fashioned. Paper trails. Physical documents. The palace was full of filing rooms and storage areas that hadn't been digitized. Places where secrets might hide because no one thought to look. During his break, Thomas slipped into the administrative wing. He had a reason. To be there if anyone asked, delivering a report to facilities management. But his real destination was the records room in the basement. The room was dusty and cramped, filled with filing cabinets that dated back decades. Thomas started with property management files, leases, maintenance contracts, anything that might connect to real estate holdings. He searched for an hour, finding nothing. Then, tucked behind a row of cabinets, he noticed a smaller locked drawer. The lock was new, unlike the rusty fixtures on the other cabinets. Thomas glanced at the door. No one was coming. Odd was out. A small tool from his pocket, something he'd learned to use in his early security training. The lock clicked open. Inside were folders. Not old yellowed papers, but fresh documents in pristine condition. Thomas lifted the first folder carefully. What he saw made him forget to breathe. Property deeds, lists of addresses across the UK. Shell company names he'd never heard of. And there, on multiple documents, was a signature he recognized. Not the Queen Consort's. That would have been too obvious. But someone close to her, someone authorized to act on her behalf, and then he found it. A letter dated 6 months earlier, outlining the transfer of properties to the private interests of family members not publicly acknowledged. Family members not publicly acknowledged. Thomas photographed everything with his phone, his hands shaking slightly. This was it. This was the proof. He was returning the folders when he heard footsteps in the hallway, heavy, purposeful footsteps. Thomas closed the drawer quickly, but the lock didn't catch. He tried again. The footsteps were getting closer. Finally, the lock clicked. Thomas moved toward the main filing cabinets, pretending to search through them just as the door opened. 2 men entered. Not palace security. Private contractors. The kind who worked for people who needed problems to disappear. Can we help you? One of them asked. His tone was polite, but his eyes were cold. Just looking for maintenance records, Thomas said casually. Routine check. The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Maintenance records are in Building C. This is archives, right? My mistake. Thomas moved toward the door, but the second man shifted slightly, blocking the exit. You've seemed lost a lot lately, Thomas. The use of his name sent a chill down his spine. Thomas kept his face neutral. Just doing my job? We all are, the first man said. Question is, are you doing yours? Or are you doing something else? Thomas met his gaze. I protect this place. That's my job. Good, the man replied. Then you know that some doors are meant to stay closed. Some questions aren't meant to be asked. The second man stepped aside, finally allowing Thomas to pass. But as he walked down the hallway, Thomas heard one of them speak quietly. He has his phone on him. Check what he accessed. Thomas didn't run. He walked calmly to the nearest bathroom, locked himself in a stall, and immediately transferred the photos to a cloud account under a false name. Then he deleted them from his phone. His hands were trembling now, not from fear, but from the weight of what he'd found. This wasn't just about money or property. This was about lies at the highest level, about a son kept hidden from the world while he enriched himself through royal connections. Thomas looked at his reflection in the mirror. He barely recognized himself. 3 weeks ago, he was a loyal guard. Now he was a man carrying explosive secrets, and he had no idea who he could trust anymore. Thomas met David again, this time in a crowded coffee shop in Camden, where conversations disappeared into noise. He handed over a USB drive with the photographs. David scrolled through the images on his laptop, his expression growing more serious with each document. When he finished, he closed the laptop and looked at Thomas with something between respect and concern. This is real, David said quietly. This is massive. Can you publish it? David hesitated. I can try. But Thomas, you need to understand what will happen if I do. They'll come for you. They'll question where you got this. They'll destroy your credibility, maybe charge you with theft or breach of security. Your career will be over. Your life might never be the same. I know. Do you? David leaned forward. I've seen what powerful people do when their secrets are threatened. They don't just fight back. They annihilate. And the royal family has more power than most. Thomas had thought about this every night since finding the documents. He'd imagined the consequences, played out every scenario. But every time, he came back to the same conclusion. If I do nothing, I'm protecting lies, Thomas said. I took an oath to serve with honor. This isn't honor. David studied him for a long moment. All right. Give me a week. I need to verify everything, get legal clearance, find corroborating sources. But Thomas, from this moment forward, be careful. Assume you're being watched. They parted ways separately. Thomas took the long route home, changing trains twice and walking through areas with poor camera coverage. He was learning to think like someone with something to hide. But when he reached his flat, he knew immediately that something was wrong. The door was locked exactly as he'd left it. But there were scratches around the keyhole, fresh ones. And when he stepped inside, everything looked the same. Almost. His books were in the right order, but one was slightly askew. His laptop was closed, but the charging cable was on the wrong side. Someone had been here. Someone who knew how to search without leaving obvious signs. Thomas didn't touch anything. He backed out of the flat and called David from a payphone 2 blocks away. They've been in my home, Thomas said. Be sure. I'm sure, David swore softly. They're making sure you don't have copies. Or they're sending a message. Either way, you can't stay there. Where do I go? I have a friend with a flat in Brighton. It's empty this week. I'll text you the address, not to your regular phone. Get a burner. And Thomas? Don't tell anyone where you're going. Not family, not friends. No one. Thomas bought a cheap phone from a corner shop and left London that night. He took a bus instead of a train, paid in cash, wore a cap pulled low over his face. He felt ridiculous and scared and strangely alive all at once. The Brighton flat was small and cold, but it felt safer than anywhere else. Thomas spent the next 3 days barely sleeping, jumping at every sound, constantly checking the street below. On the 4th day, David called. "We're ready to publish," David said. "But I need you to do something first. I need you on record. Not with your name, we can keep you anonymous, but I need your account of what you saw and heard. It makes the story bulletproof." Thomas agreed. They arranged to meet at a secure location, a film studio where David had connections, where they could record Thomas's testimony without being traced. But as Thomas prepared to leave the flat, his new phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "We know where you are. We know what you took. Come to the south entrance of the palace tomorrow at noon. Loan, or everyone you care about will pay the price." Thomas stared at the message. His mouth went dry. They'd found him. Despite everything, they'd found him. He called David. "They want to meet." "Don't go. It's a trap. They threaten people I care about. That's what they want you to think. They're trying to scare you into silence." But Thomas wasn't sure anymore. What if they meant it? What if exposing the truth meant putting his family at risk? That night, Thomas made the hardest decision of his life. He would go to the meeting, but he wouldn't go unprepared, and he wouldn't go quietly. Thomas arrived at the south entrance exactly at noon. The sky was gray, threatening rain. He wore his guard uniform. If this was going to be his last day, he would face it as what he was. A black car waited by the gate. The same 2 private contractors from the records room stepped out. They gestured for him to get inside without saying a word. The drive was short. They took him not into the palace, but to a private office building nearby, the kind wealthy families used for discreet business. Thomas was led up to the 3rd floor, into a conference room with expensive furniture and windows that overlooked the Thames. The man from that midnight conversation sat at the table. Up close, the resemblance was even more striking. He had the same nose, the same careful posture. He looked at Thomas without emotion. "Sit down," the man said. Thomas remained standing. "Who are you?" "That's not important." "It is to me, and it will be to everyone else when the truth comes out." The man smiled slightly. "The truth. You make it sound so simple. But truth is just a story people choose to believe. And right now, no one will believe your story. The documents will." "What documents?" "The ones that were returned to the proper files? The ones that show nothing unusual?" The man leaned back. "You broke into a restricted area. You accessed files without authorization. You violated your security clearance. That's the story everyone will hear." Thomas felt his confidence waver. "People saw those documents. A journalist you met in secret. A man who's been desperate for a big story for years. His credibility against the crown." The man shook his head. "You lose that fight. So why am I here? If you've already won, why bring me in?" The man stood and walked to the window. "Because I don't want to destroy you, Thomas. You seem like a decent man, loyal, honorable. Those are qualities we respect. Then prove it. Tell me the truth." The man turned. "All right. You want the truth?" "Yes, I'm her son. From before she was ever famous, before she was ever royal, a mistake, they called me. An embarrassment. I was sent away, raised quietly, told never to speak about my real mother." Thomas felt a strange mixture of anger and pity. "So you blackmailed her?" "Blackmail?" The man laughed bitterly. "No, she wanted to help me. She felt guilty, I suppose. She arranged things. The properties, the investments, a way to secure my future without the public knowing. Is that so terrible? It's fraud. It's using royal influence for private gain. It's a mother taking care of her son." The man's voice hardened. Something she should have done from the beginning. Thomas struggled with this. Part of him understood, but the larger part knew that intent didn't excuse the crime. "You're still breaking the law," Thomas said quietly. "Perhaps. But here's what you need to understand. If this story goes public, it doesn't just hurt me. It doesn't just hurt the queen consort. It damages the entire institution. It creates chaos at a time when stability matters. And for what? To satisfy your sense of duty? The man walked closer. I'm offering you a choice. Walk away. Forget what you saw. In return, you'll receive a generous retirement package. Early pension. Enough money to start over somewhere nice? Cornwall, maybe. Or abroad, if you prefer. You're trying to buy my silence. I'm trying to give you a future. The man's voice softened. Thomas, you've already lost. The documents are gone. Your journalist friend won't publish without solid evidence. Your career at the palace is finished regardless of what you choose. I'm offering you the only good option you have left. Thomas looked at the man. In his eyes, Thomas saw something unexpected. Not cruelty, but tiredness. The weariness of someone who'd spent a lifetime living a lie. What if I say no? Thomas asked. The man sighed. Then we protect ourselves. You'll face charges for security breaches. Your reputation will be destroyed. And the people you care about, your sister in Manchester, your nephew at university, they'll find themselves under scrutiny. Nothing illegal, just uncomfortable attention. It was a threat wrapped in gentle words. Thomas understood perfectly. He thought about his sister, his nephew, David. All the people who would suffer if he pushed forward. And he thought about the institution he'd served for 12 years, the crown he'd sworn to protect. But mostly, he thought about the oath he'd taken. To serve with honor, Thomas looked the man in the eye. I need 24 hours. The man agreed to 24 hours. Thomas left the building and walked through London for 3 hours, thinking. The rain started halfway through, but he barely noticed. He called David from a phone booth near Westminster. They offered me money to stay quiet, Thomas said. And they threatened my family. Will you take it? Thomas was silent for a long moment. What happens if we publish? Honestly, it could go either way. The story is strong. The documents are compelling. But they have resources we don't. We could bury it. Or it could explode and change everything. And if it explodes, then you're a whistleblower. Protected by law, hopefully. But still a target for the rest of your life. Thomas watched the rain hit the pavement. I keep thinking about why I became a guard. It wasn't for the money or the prestige. It was because I believed in something. Service, duty, honor, real honor, not just the word. And now? Now I know that honor isn't about protecting institutions. It's about protecting the truth. David exhaled. So we publish? We publish. The story went live at 6 a.m. the next morning. David's outlet put it on the front page, digital and print. The headline was simple and devastating. Hidden royal son owns secret property empire worth millions. By 8 a.m., every major news organization had picked it up. By noon, the palace was in crisis mode. By evening, Parliament was demanding an investigation. Thomas watched it all from the Brighton flat, his burner phone buzzing with notifications from news alerts. He felt strangely calm. Whatever happened next, he'd done the right thing. The palace issued a statement denying all allegations. The Queen Consort's representatives called the story malicious fiction. The hidden son disappeared from public view completely, but the documents were real. The evidence was solid, and slowly, other people started coming forward. A property manager who'd handled the transactions, a lawyer who'd set up the shell companies, each one adding another piece to the puzzle. Within a week, there was no denying it anymore. The scandal was real. Thomas's identity as the source leaked eventually. These things always do. He was fired, as expected. Charged with breaching security protocols, though the charges were later dropped due to public pressure. He became famous in a way he'd never wanted, his face on newspapers, his story told and retold. Some called him a hero. Others called him a traitor. Thomas didn't feel like either. He felt like a man who'd made the only choice he could live with. 6 months later, Thomas sat in a small cafe in Scotland, far from London and the chaos he'd left behind. He worked now as a security consultant for a local business. Nothing glamorous, but honest work. His sister had forgiven him for the attention she'd faced. His nephew said he was proud of him. David had won an award for the story, and donated half the prize money to Thomas. Thomas's phone buzzed. A news alert. The investigation had concluded. The Queen Consort had been cleared of direct wrongdoing, but several advisors had resigned. The hidden son had quietly left the country. The properties were being sold, with proceeds going to charity. It wasn't perfect justice, but it was something. Thomas looked out the window at the Scottish hills, green and peaceful. He thought about the guard he'd been, naive, trusting, believing that duty meant obedience. Now he knew better. Real duty meant doing the right thing, even when it cost you everything. Especially when it cost you everything. His phone buzzed again. A text from an unknown number. Thank you. Thomas stared at it. He'd never know who sent it. Maybe someone at the palace who'd wanted the truth to come out? Maybe someone who'd suffered under the same lies? Maybe even the son himself. Freed from a secret that had defined his life. Thomas deleted the message and finished his coffee. The past was done. He couldn't change what had happened or predict what would come next. But sitting there, in that quiet cafe, watching the rain start to fall over the hills, Thomas felt something he hadn't felt in months. Peace. He had kept his honor. And in the end, that was the only thing that mattered.